Describe, I mean, you're talking about the biggest emergency in the UN's history, this crisis, the worst since World War II, as the UN is describing it right now. Do you see this as a proxy war, and between what countries, and for what, Patrick?
Oh, it is clearly a proxy war. I mean, this may have started off as a popular uprising in Syria, but by now it has 4 or 5 different conflicts wrapped into one. And you have an opposition, but an opposition which is fragmented and really proxies for foreign powers. Notably, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey plays a role. What has changed recently, since midsummer, is that Saudi Arabia is becoming the main financier for the rebel military groups inside Syria. Qatar is playing a lesser role. So the Saudis are trying to develop a Sunni Islamic force that is against the Assad government in Damascus, but is also against al-Qaeda. But this is, even so, very much a sectarian force, which is already being blamed for sectarian attacks on Christians and Druze and Alawites. Then, of course, you also have the United States, Britain, and France. A recent defector from the Free Syrian Army who joined the al-Qaeda-affiliated Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, said he was continually attending meetings, I don't know, he didn't say where, but probably in Turkey, in which always representatives of foreign intelligence services turned up, and at one moment were being presided over by the Saudi Deputy Defense Minister.
Well, Patrick Coburn, could you explain what exactly happened to the Syrian National Coalition and the Free Syrian Army, the main opposition group that the U.S. and Britain and other countries in the West were backing and hoping would be a legitimate replacement, possibly in the future, to the Assad regime?
Yeah, there was always an element of pretense in this, pretending that the Free Syrian Army and the Syrian National Coalition were represented Syrians inside the country. It was always very much an outside, exiled development. You know, they never really controlled much on the ground, and what they did control is now very little. That's, you know, the headquarters was overrun by the Islamic Front, which is a sort of combination of Sunni groups, appears to be backed by Saudi Arabia. Basically, it's been a disaster. So these so-called sort of moderate elements have never had much influence inside Syria, and now seem to be sort of almost completely marginalized.
And the significance of Idris leaving, going over the border into Turkey. Talk about who he is and his role.
Well, he's the general, former general, who was, you know, I used to watch him and wonder how did he have so much time to appear on CNN and so many other programs abroad. It didn't leave him much time to direct military action. But I think it did reflect the fact that he was very much a figure who it was useful for Western governments and Western media to promote as the leader of the revolt in Syria. But he was always pretty isolated, though he got a lot of believers outside the country. Now he seems to be on the run, really, between Turkey and Qatar. But there was always, I mean, it's really pretenses being exposed about these movements and individuals not being representative of the opposition within Syria, and that opposition being far more sectarian, close to al-Qaeda, than foreign governments were prepared to admit, or foreign media was prepared to admit, even a year ago.
Reporters Without Borders, who just released has just revealed that at least 10 journalists and 35 citizen journalists have been killed in Syria in 2013. The group said 49 journalists were abducted in Syria, more than the rest of the world combined. In a statement, Reporters Without Borders said, quote, 2013 was a turning point because jihadi groups began kidnapping and murdering journalists in the so-called liberated zones for the first time since the start of the uprising in 2011. Patrick Cockburn, could you talk about the dangers that journalists confront in Syria, and who is behind the increasing strength of these jihadi groups in Syria?
Yeah, I mean, over the last year, I'd put it even earlier, it's been getting more and more dangerous, I think, sort of, in fact, almost impossible these days for foreign journalists to visit rebel-held areas. Some have been picked up, you know, just when they cross the border. Also very threatening is the fact that some who thought they had protection from local rebel commanders have found that when they come to a checkpoint controlled by the jihadis, by the Islamic State of Iraq or the Levant or somebody like that, that it isn't just they who get kidnapped, but some Free Syrian Army commander with them and his men also get kidnapped. So the old protectors can't protect themselves and certainly can't protect foreign journalists. Why does it happen? Well, people are after ransom. I mean, a lot of these groups, you know, are under these different rubrics of Free Syrian Army or maybe Islamic Front or different, are really sort of part-time bandits. Some would say whole-time bandits. They change their colors depending on who's supplying them with money. They're prepared to claim strong religious belief or the opposite, depending on where they can get supplies. But all of these, one of the factors that's happening has been the criminalization of the military forces of the Syrian opposition. And foreign journalists are the victims, Syrian journalists are the victims, and ordinary Syrians are the victims. In some senses, foreign journalists are now having the same dangers inflicted on them that apply for anybody within the rebel areas.
Last month, Secretary of State John Kerry held talks in Saudi Arabia with King Abdullah. The meeting came amidst reported tensions between the two sides over Syria, Iran, and the Israel-Palestine peace talks. At a news conference, Kerry said the United States and Saudi Arabia were in agreement.
There is no difference about our mutually agreed-upon objective in Syria. As I have said many times before, Assad has lost all legitimacy, and Assad must go. Nothing that we are doing with respect to this negotiation will alter or upset or get in the way of the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia and the relationship in this region.
Patrick Cockburn, you've also written about the differences, the growing differences between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and you have a piece headlined, "Mass Murder in the Middle East is Funded by Our Friends, the Saudis." Can you elaborate on this?
Sure, I find it, you know, it is one of the most extraordinary aspects of the turmoil in the Middle East that the Saudi backing for extreme Sunni organizations, for jihadi organizations, isn't opposed by the U.S. more vigorously. If you look at the official 9/11 Commission report, it said the main backers for Al-Qaeda are private Saudi donors and donors in the other Gulf states, the Sunni Gulf states. Wikipedia released a memorandum from Hillary Clinton, I think in end of 2009, many years later.
WikiLeaks.
And what does it
WikiLeaks.
say? Exactly the same thing. The main backers for Al-Qaeda and type organizations of Sunni organized fanatical jihadi groups is Saudi private donors in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. And you know, at the moment in Syria, Syria has taken over the funding of militant military groups who in their own programs say we are Sunni groups. They don't deny their sectarianism. they only seem to differ from al-Qaeda in that al-Qaeda is independent and of Saudi Arabia, and these people are dependent on Saudi Arabia. So I think that there's a whole series of Frankenstein monsters, both in Syria and in northern Iraq, that have been created and supported and aided by private citizens and at times the state in Saudi Arabia. But the U.S. has refused to do anything about this. It really is absurd to focus on tiny al-Qaeda groups in the hill villages of Yemen without looking at these very dangerous developments in northern Iraq and eastern and northern Syria, where al-Qaeda and its affiliates for the first time control a great swathe of territory, really from the upper reaches of the Tigris River to the coast of the Mediterranean. This is a very big area. You know, it's an extraordinary development. Saudi Arabia has played a key role in this development, but there's been very little reaction in the US or Western Europe or from these many security agencies that are meant to be focusing on al-Qaeda.
Patrick Coburn, I'd just like to say that the statement by Hillary Clinton was released by WikiLeaks and not Wikipedia. I wanted to ask you, though, why you think the U.S. has been relatively silent on Saudi's role, on Saudi Arabia's role. One of the things that you point out is that these Sunni jihadist groups principally target Shias, not only in Iraq, but also in Pakistan and in Syria, and that may in some sense account for U.S. silence. Could you talk about some of the other reasons?
Yeah, I think that that's one of the main reasons, and many of these killings of Shia get very little publicity. And then Saudi Arabia has, through a distribution of arms contracts, through its money, sort of made itself part of the international establishment, in which normally foreign leaders visiting Saudi Arabia don't bring up these delicate topics and put very little pressure on the Saudis to do anything about it. But, you know, it is it enables the Saudis to really go on supporting jihadi organizations at the state or private level in the same way that they were doing in Afghanistan, post-Afghanistan, when they supported the Taliban, before 9/11, after 9/11, during Iraq, after Iraq. There seems no end to it, but it is rather astonishing that there isn't less reaction from governments and the media in the U.S. and Western Europe.
Well, what about that? The issue of the media in the United States and how it covers Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, well, much of the time it doesn't really cover Saudi Arabia, and it's usually rather sort of delicate coverage. Of course, the Saudis don't make it easy for journalists to have access, but many of the facts about Saudi Arabia's relationship to al-Qaeda and to Sunni jihadi organizations don't require any investigation. I mean, you know, they're admitted, they're in plain view, and still nothing is done about it. You know, these are sort of attacks on drone attacks or other attacks in northern Waziristan against al-Qaeda, in Yemen, in Somalia, are really peripheral to the main problem, which is centered in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. And the outcome of this support for these extreme organizations is to be seen in northern Iraq, western Iraq, which is now substantially under the control of al-Qaeda-linked organizations, and across the border in Syria, right the way from along the Euphrates River, right to Aleppo and to the Mediterranean coast. So, you know, it is extraordinary that al-Qaeda has been the great sort of winner of the conflict over the last, whenever it is, since 9/11. And they've managed to make such tremendous gains without much opposition from Washington or London or Paris.